So now I've got a pair of forks and a motorcycle without any forks. I think we know what's going to be happening next. That's right, a little bit of insertion. So refitting the forks is pretty much the reverse of taking them out. I'm just going to open up the yoke clamp a little bit with my screwdriver just so I can get the leg in fairly easily, and I'm going to push it in, make sure we get the right amount of protrusion at the top, and then just nip everything up. Right, so that's fork leg 1 in, the height is checked, I've just nipped the yokes up for now. I'll put the other fork leg in and then I'll get the torque wrench out, make sure everything's done up right. So the forks are in, the yokes are torqued up, they're 25 Newton meters for the top and the bottom yoke, so that's relatively straightforward. The next thing to do is get the wheel in. So I have my wheel spindle, and I think we ought to get a bit of lube on the shaft. Because let's face it, we want everything to slip together nice and easily. So that's the spindle through, and what I'm just going to do is I'm going to put the nut on and just nip it up so that it pulls the spindle all the way through, because that locates the wheel in the centre. Right, that's just pulled all the wheel out across, so everything is nice and solid. Now I can nip up all my pinch bolts. Right, that's the pinch bolts all tight, so now I can give this a decent pull and the spindle won't be turning in the wheel. Right, so make sure the nut is nice and tight, then we can move on to the mudguard and the brakes. I prefer to take the paddock stand out of the way before I put the mudguard in, so that when I lower it down I don't hit the mudguard against the paddock stand, because it would be a shame to crack anything or scratch anything when we don't need to. So that's it, the forks are in, the front wheel's in, everything's tight at the front end, except the brakes. Because while I've got them off, I may as well take the pads out and clean the pistons and make sure everything's minty mint in there. So, next thing to do is take the retaining pins out of here, which are held in with the spring clips. So these retaining pins hold these spring clips in, and then the pads can come out. And then we can get in there with a toothbrush and make sure everything's nice and clean. So I've laid out my brake pads and the bits on my bench, and so this is the sort of higher outside pad, the top inside pad, the lower ones in order. If I keep everything in order, if they've sort of bedded into a slight shape on the disc or anything, they won't need to bed in again. So I prefer to put everything in order so we can, get it all back in the same place nice and easily. And onto the caliper. I've put the other caliper on the disc just lightly so that I can pump the brake lever a few times and get the pistons to actually move slightly. And you can see they've just come out a little bit, and you can actually sort of see where the calipers were sat against the dust seal and there was a bit of dirt and bits in there. So recently I've had a few discussions with people about the unpleasantness of brake cleaner. Now I traditionally just use brake cleaner for cleaning brakes because it's called brake cleaner and I'm cleaning brakes. But there is an argument that the brake cleaner is quite aggressive on the seals and dries everything out. So what I'm going to do today, and what I've been doing a little bit recently, is I'm going to use GT85 and a toothbrush. So I'm just going to spray a load of GT85 on this, which is a little bit like WD-40, sort of release agent. So it will help shift all the dirt. The toothbrush will just agitate any stiff bits. We can give everything a good clean, and then the GT85 is also a lubricant, so when I push the pistons back in, the seals get lubed. Win-win. So that's caliper number 1 done, nice and clean. The pistons came up nicely, so I've just slid them back in and they move nice and easily, so the seals are working as they should. Nothing's sort of dragging too much. If I did a lot of winter mileage, I'd probably smear some red rubber grease behind the pistons, and as I slid them back, that would sort of lube the seals up. But being as most of my mileage is done in sort of slightly nicer weather, I'm not going to worry too much. So that's caliper 1 done. The next thing is to just give the pads a bit of a clean. To get any imperfections and dirt and bits out of the pad surfaces, I've got a stiff wire brush that I just scrape across there, and it just picks any little bits of dirt out of the pad. Then I do give those a blast with the brake cleaner to clean anything off, pop the caliper back together. That's caliper number 1 complete with the original pads put in the same place. If you want to know the torque settings, they are 50 Newton meters for the actual bolts that hold the caliper on, 22 Newton meters for the pinch bolts, and 120 for the big nut. Right, better go and do the other caliper now then. So I've got all the calipers done. I've given the discs a bit of a wipe over with some brake clean to make sure there's no spits of oil or anything on them. So that's the front end complete. I am going to put some base settings in it when I have the rest of the bike complete, but now I have to patiently wait for my generator to come back. It's not back yet. Still not back yet. Today I was very pleased to see the postman because, after a couple of weeks of patiently waiting, he has bought me my modified alternator rotor. So this has been away and it's been derated to 370 watts and it was originally 500 watts, so now I have considerably less chance of burning out my alternator stator. So this is a good upgrade. All I need to do now is rebuild this, put it back in the bike, put some oil and bits in it, and then I can actually go and ride it. So before I sent the rotor away, I took the sort of starter gear and bits off the back of it so that it weighed less and hell, it didn't need to be there. So I need to bolt that back onto the back of here, and then I need to bolt the whole lot into there. And for the last 2 weeks, because the cover is on loose, all the bike's really been doing is dribbling oil over bits of my workshop. Doesn't get at all annoying. So these are the 4 sort of elements of the rotor. We have the bit with the magnets in that actually does the charging, and that's got teeth on the side, so that's also the ignition pickup. Then you have the sprag clutch, which is in effect a one-way clutch. The little balls, one way they spin freely, the other way, if you try and turn them, they go up little ramps and they lock solid. So that's the sort of starter clutch. That in effect is pretty much just a counterweight, it's just a weight to add mass to the crank. And that is the gear that drives off the starter motor, and then the centre of it runs in the sprag clutch, and it all bolts together. And so it is starter, balance weight or weight, starter clutch and alternator assembly all in one go. So what I need to do now is bolt all these bits together. So I've cleaned up the bolts and the bolt holes so I can Loctite everything and it won't all fall apart when it's running. Yeah, right, better get bolting together. So I have 3 of the elements bolted together, and now all I need to do is slide the starter wheel, the sort of the geared wheel, into the assembly. So you can see this has got like a nice machined ground sort of finish on there, and that sits in these rollers here. So we'll drop that in there, and this is how the starter clutch works. One way it spins freely, so when the engine's spinning, sort of that bit spinning, this bit can stay still. But then when the engine's stopped and you press the starter motor, that will spin this gear and spin the whole thing, and then obviously when it's starting it just runs like that. So nice and simple, just a one-way clutch. So now it's time to actually put my rotor back on the crank. So I need a little bit of engine oil on here and some Loctite retaining compound on the actual taper, because that's what Aprilia told me I should do. So we'll have just a little bit on there because that will roll around the radius of there. Some Loctite retaining compound on here, and when I took it apart there was a fairly generous coating of that, so we'll not be too shy with it. Reason for the oil at the back is because the starter gear obviously wants to be able to spin, and it's got little dimples on a brass thing, so that's got to spin around there. There is a keyway just here, so I need to line that up with the keyway hole, the sort of machine groove in my flywheel, and then it's a case of just slipping that into there. Right, I can feel it on the key. Then I've just got to spin the starter clutch a little bit to get it to engage with that gear there. Right, and that's that sort of in the right place. The next thing I need to do is put some Loctite on this bolt and then tighten that into there, and that holds the alternator together. Again, fairly generous with my Loctite because the bolt had lots on it when I took it apart. And in we go. I suppose I really ought to go and get the right size Allen key to buzz that up with. Right, so I'm going to use my impact gun to begin with to spin this down so it pushes it onto the taper, and then I will actually get a torque wrench and torque that up to 130 Newton meters, and the thing that's stopping the crank turning is the crank locking bolt that's still in the other side of the engine from when I took it apart. And that way I also know that we've got everything in the right place. Right, so that's fairly nipped up. I shall go and get my big torque wrench. Right, big torque wrench at the ready, and... Right, that's tight enough then. So the next thing to do is have a last little clean up round the gasket face on there and on the actual casing. Make sure everything's nice and clean. Apply my new gasket and bolt it all back together. So I've given the face on the engine and on the sort of outer cover a good clean, and to get any last little bits of gasket material off, any of the old stuff off, running over with an oil stone is pretty good because it's hard enough that it takes the bits off it. So that's all ready to go. I dab a little grease, or smear a bit of grease around the gasket, and there's two reasons for this. The first one is it helps it stay in place while I'm putting everything together, and the second one is if I have to take it apart in the first couple of days for any reason, it's got a fighting chance of coming apart without splitting. So the next thing to do is a little bit of a smear of sealant just around the outside of the rubber bit to help that seal, and then put that onto there. But as I put it on, the magnet will grab it and pull it on quite quickly, so I have to be quite careful because you do not want your fingers in the way. Easy as that. Now all I need to do is actually tighten everything up. This side of the bike is now complete. The cover's on, the gasket's looking good, I've made sure all the cable routing and everything looked okay. The breathers are all tucked around where they should be, so that's all looking pretty good. I've put the oil tank back on, but it is empty at the moment, and in a minute I'm going to change the filter before I put any oil in it. But before I do that, I do need to take the crank locking bolt out of the other side of the crankcases and put the bolt back in that secures all that. So I need to take that bolt out which locks the crank in position, then I need to put the bolt in that, fills the hole, and then the engine is complete, barring the oil. So now I've got all the bits of the engine bolted together, so when I pour oil in, it won't just fall out of the bottom, it is time to actually put the oil in. So I'll be using some Motul semi-synthetic 1550, and they take just under 4 litres. But because it's dry sump, what you have to do is fill it up, sort of fairly high, and then run it for a bit so it sucks it down out of here and actually around the engine, and then let it all settle down and then put oil in again. And it's a little bit of a faff. I really actually tell you to put in a certain amount of oil and then go riding for 5 minutes so everything's nice and hot and it's all around the coolers, and then check your oil level. I don't have my riding kit with me today, so I shall just have it running on the bench. I have a basically full oil tank, which won't be full as soon as the bike actually starts running, or at least that's the idea. So, moment of truth, and this hasn't been run in, weeks now. If I turn that on, helps if I've got the fuel pump on, and it's probably not a bad idea if I let it turn over a few times first, actually get a little bit of oil around it. Right, we'll try that again. It is moving the oil down, and now we've turned it off, it's actually kept moving the oil down. So I'll just let that settle for a minute, and then we'll have another little run, and hopefully it'll keep sucking its oil down. So I'm just letting the engine get hot to move all its oil around so I can set the level, and at tick over, or in fact until you start moving, you can check the voltage on the dashboard. And it always used to charge at tick over at about 14 to 14.2 volts, which was quite a lot. It would turn out actually it's too much. So, with the modified rotor, we're now charging at 13.4, 13.5 volts, which is considerably healthier. Job sorted. I've run the bike until the fan's cut in and out a couple of times, and I've had some revs on it and bits to get as much oil temperature as I could into it, and after it's settled down a little bit, the oil is right down near the bottom. Now I don't want it right near the top because then they tend to breathe quite heavily and sort of pump oil into the airbox, which is not ideal. So I'm going to set the oil level sort of about a third to halfway up the tube. So I'm going to top that up, then I'm going to put all the little trim pieces on and bits. When I ride the bike, I will actually, check it again, but it should be pretty good at that. So the Tuono is ready to go again. I'm excited to see how good the forks are now I've fiddled inside those, and I know it's going to be a bit more reliable with what we've done to the generator. So all we need now is some dry roads so I can get a thorough test ride and see how good it really is. With the skies clear and the roads dry, it was time to head out on the Tuono, and I purposely pointed it towards some relatively twisty and quite bumpy local roads, because I needed to scrub the back tyre in and I wanted to feel the difference with the new forks. Having put a quick base setting in the forks the day before, I went out to see what they were like, and as soon as I rattled it across the first bumps, they were definitely better. There's just more control and the bike feels more planted and plusher over the bumps. And as a consequence as well, they're also better on the brakes, so that's a double bonus. There is still a little bit of noise coming through from the front end, but nothing too bad, and with a little bit of tweaking I'm sure I can get it better. So the other changes I've made to the bike haven't really changed how the bike rides, so it still rides really, really well. They've just made it more reliable, so I can enjoy riding it really, really well for longer, and not having to worry that the next yellow van I see I'll be putting my bike in the back of. So it's a thumbs up from me and a job well done. So now it's just time to get some more miles in on the Tuono and enjoy it, because it's great to be back out on the old girl. Thanks for watching the Tuono upgrades. If you enjoyed the videos, please like and subscribe, and join me again soon for some more motorbike fun.